Hello, everybody, and welcome to our training. This is going to be an intense workshop where we're going to be talking about Google Ads as well as Bing Ads, our Microsoft advertising automation. I'm joined today with Sean Bond from PPC Samurai, who is, I consider, one of the foremost experts in the world in this topic. Not only has a lot of knowledge, but is very generous with sharing the knowledge and has built a platform on top of some of these ideas that he's going to be teaching that can use to make anybody more efficient with how they manage ads. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, Jeff. I'm super excited to be here, actually. So thank you for having me, everyone. All right, so the topic for the first section is modern search campaigns, looking at a hybrid approach. So we're effectively, we're going to give you the tools. We're going to give you three main tools that you can then mix and match in whatever way works for you. But these three main tools are designed specifically to take advantage of Google Smart Bidding and that sort of thing, where there's an awful lot of data that's available in Google. We just need to get it in the right sort of format so that we can feed it into the machine to get the best results out of the back end. And that's a mistake that we see a lot of people make when they're constructing campaigns in the search environment, is that they don't really think about how the Google search algorithms are going to look at the data that they're producing. So a lot of this, what we're going to talk about is how to get the right data in the right place so that Google can then do what it needs to do in the back end to give you the best results possible. And hopefully you'll be able to see how that sort of hangs together. So first of all, we'll just look, why would I need to even consider changing what I'm doing? And the first big thing is smart bidding. So smart bidding needs a lot of data to really be super effective. So what we're looking at doing is how do we move away from a siloed data approach and move more to an aggregated data approach, where we can basically hand over a big data set into Google and let the machine learning do its thing from there. The second reason why we need to change our thinking is Google introduced intent matching. So intent matching is obviously where you've got search terms that are matching to keywords. Google are now matching search terms to keywords based on what they think the intent of the searcher is. So it's no longer a direct match. It used to be awesome because we could all have single keyword ad groups and whatever other structures we wanted. And we could really control where the search terms triggered so that we could control then what ads a client saw and all those sorts of things. Intent matching has just thrown the cat amongst the pigeons, and it's really made it difficult for those sort of structures to be as efficient as they were. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, as Jeff said, your competitors are starting to do this stuff. So if you are not on the train, you're off it and you're going to get left behind. So this stuff is coming. The smart bidding is here. It's been here for a couple of years and it's getting very good. Now, it's not always the right solution, but if it is the right solution, then you really need to make sure your campaigns are structured in the right way to feed that particular machine. So let's crack on. So the first structure that we're going to talk about is single keyword ad groups, or SKAGs. Then we're going to talk about, I don't even know how to pronounce this, SIAGs or SIAGs or something. Anyway, they're single intent ad groups is what that stands for. And then the third structure we're going to talk about is HAGAKURE. Actually, I pronounced that so badly. I looked up how to pronounce this. It's a Japanese word, and I think it's something like HAGAKURE. So my apologies for my Australian accent. It's HAGAKURE for me. All right.
All good.
So,
all good.
So our the first topic is going to be SKAGs. So, and a question that we get asked quite a bit actually is, in the modern environment with smart bidding, is SCAG is still a viable structure for me to build because that's the way I've done it before, and my brain is kind of there. So, is it still okay to use it in a smart bidding environment? Before we answer that question, we're just going to quickly touch on what a single keyword ad group is, just in case you haven't come across them before. So they are effectively one keyword per ad group, and that keyword can be multiple match types. So, for example, if you're selling Nike running shoes, so you would have Nike men's running shoes model X, and then you might have Nike women's running shoes model Y. And so you'd have two ad groups, each with their own keyword, potentially multiple match types in that ad group. And The reason that a lot of people do that is because you used to be able to really control the search terms and therefore the bids on the search term, not just the keyword, but also control the ads so that they really spoke to what someone was typing in. And this is an example of a traditional SCAG structure. So where we've got a campaign here and you've got all of your individual ad groups with your individual keywords sitting in them. Again, these might be multiple match types. And then you have an ad that speaks specifically to this keyword. So that's a pretty traditional single keyword ad group structure. Now, the question that we're asking is, are they dead? And honestly, if you're using smart bidding, the answer is yes, they're probably past their use by date. If you're using manual bidding, might be a little bit different, but intent matching is still a problem for single keyword ad groups. And that ability for Google to be able to match a search term to any keyword they feel is the appropriate keyword really sort of destroys the integrity of SCAGs and what they were intended to do in the first place. So I call intent match loose match because it really is very loose. And if you look through the search term report and you put your keyword column in there, you can sort of scratch your head some days and wonder what Google was thinking when they matched one thing to another. So what that does effectively is it erodes the effectiveness of the single keyword ad group and the siloing of data. So saying that they're dead doesn't mean that they're actually dead. They've just changed in their role. So there is actually in the smart bidding world and the AI world, there is a role for single keyword ad groups. So what we're going to do is to talk you through how we see single keyword ad groups being used in this modern environment. So when would you use a single keyword ad group in an account? Well, the answer to that is largely on high volume search terms. So we're talking high impression volume and high conversions, because everything we talk about here, if you look at it through the lens of we need to present Google with a big bunch of data for anything we do. And so if we have 1,000 single keyword ad groups in an account, we've probably got a couple of those ad groups that actually are producing a decent amount of volume that the smart bidding algorithm can really use. But then you've got the majority of them that would be very sort of small siloed data sets. And the smart bidding algorithm, it does use it, but it doesn't use it as efficiently as if you had to put it all into kind of one place. So by using single keyword ad groups only on high volume search terms, you're effectively saying, well, this ad group actually has enough impression volume and conversion volume to feed something useful into the machine. So that's the scenario under which we would use a single keyword ad group. The second thing that I would say, and again, this is generally speaking, you would use exact match only. As soon as you start using phrase or broad match in a single keyword ad group, you're opening yourself up to intent match, and it's actually going against what we're going to be talking about in terms of the strategy for locking down this single keyword ad group. And the third thing that you're going to want to be able to actually deliver on is the ability to sculpt traffic. So let's say we go back to our Nike example and we're selling our ladies running shoes Model Y. We put that in as an exact match keyword in our single keyword ad group. Google can still match that that keyword against search terms that actually aren't the same as that keyword. So they could still match it to ladies jogging shoes or ladies squash shoes or something like that. And they'll probably find some really random stuff that's nothing to do with shoes as well, just quietly. So you need the ability to be able to sculpt traffic away from this single keyword ad group if it's not the same as the keyword that you're bidding on. And you effectively want to get it to a scenario where you really lock down that ad group so that the only things that are matching your keyword are search terms that directly match the keyword. And I'll show you how to do that. So it actually is still possible in an intent match world. So we look at how to build our single keyword ad groups. The very first thing we need to do is to create a separate campaign for your single keyword ad group. So, and the reason for that, actually, if I go back, the reason for that is it's not one campaign per ad group, it's one campaign for your single keyword ad groups. So you might have a bunch of single keyword ad groups in this one campaign. And the reason for that generally is that you will generally want budget allocated to them as a priority. Right, so we don't want to run out of budget on these super important search terms that we've gone to all the trouble of identifying and building ad groups for. We definitely want to make sure that there's enough budget for them. So we build our single keyword ad group. The easiest way that I've seen to do that, the campaign, is just in Google Ads Editor. If you're pulling search terms out of an existing campaign and you're going to create single keyword ad groups with some of these search terms, just go into Google Ads Editor, copy and paste the original campaign in Google Ads Editor, and then delete the ad groups and change the bid strategy to manual, and then upload that back into Google. And that way you get all of your settings in your original campaign, your location settings and your time of days and all that stuff. It takes you about 2 minutes to set up this particular shell campaign. And that's what you'll end up with, is a campaign with no ad groups to start with. Because the next step is we're going to go look at our search term report and find the search terms that, in our mind, qualify to be good enough to produce enough data for Google to be in their own single keyword ad group. So you go to your search term report, sort by conversions, and have a look and see what's sitting in there. And what you're looking for is really, really high converting search terms that have a lot of volume. And I've got a little note there. You might need a pivot table to do this, particularly where you've got the same search term being matched in multiple locations, which happens all the time with intent matching. So a pivot table will allow you to consolidate the results for a particular search term and then actually look at, well, this search term, regardless of where it's triggering against, how is this search term performing? And so a pivot table is ideal for that if it's not completely obvious when you go into your search term report. And I'll put a little link there to a YouTube video just on how to build a pivot table by a guy that does marketing. And so it's kind of related to our particular topic. So I've got a screenshot here of a campaign that I manage where we're looking at the search term report. I've gone in and I've sorted by conversions, and I've picked some time period that is relatively useful for this account. So you need to just pick a time frame that works for you. It might be 30 days, might be 90, 180, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just got to be relative to that client's account and to be able to show you where you've got data sitting. And so for this account, 90 days was a good sort of middle ground. As you can see, we've got nearly 35,000 conversions over 90 days. So we've got plenty of data to rely on. So I sort by that. I've got a bunch of search terms in here. I've obviously blurred them out. But many of these search terms are actually the same search term. So if I went away and put this into a pivot table, these conversion numbers would all change to aggregate to the search term. So the other thing that I'm looking for here, obviously, is impressions, because I want search terms that have plenty of conversions and plenty of impressions. And I'll show you some rules of thumb in a minute on how to kind of work that out. So we go through our list, whether it's a pivot table or whether it's in Google Ads. We're looking for those really high conversion, high impression type search terms. Here's that rule of thumb I was mentioning. So we're looking at search terms that have around about 2% of your total conversions and around about 500 impressions a week. If you can find search terms that match that kind of volume level, then you've got something that should be able to produce enough data within its own right as a single keyword ad group that you've locked down so that the search term only triggers against that keyword and no other search terms trigger. So it's this specific search term that I'm interested in. That should have enough data to be able to feed the algorithm. So I've gone through and I've done that in my campaign here. I've just highlighted the ones for this campaign just to show you sort of my thought process. So these search terms generally have around 2% of the total conversion volume. And if we aggregate them in a pivot table, they definitely have at least 500 impressions a week. So these ones here, I think there were about 2 or 3 out of this bunch when we aggregated them. They present really, really good candidates pulling out and putting into a single keyword ad group. So then in my shell campaign that still doesn't have any ad groups in it yet, I now know the search terms and the ad groups that I want to create. So I create one ad group in my campaign for every search term that I want to target. And again, I use Google Ads Editor for that because it's just way faster than the Google Ads interface. So I picked some sort of random search terms here. This client definitely doesn't sell elephant rides, but my fictitious client does. So we end up with our campaign and 2 ad groups in this case. So we've got a search term that's elephant rides near me and another search term, elephant rides Thailand. let's just say those two met our criteria and they've got plenty of volume and we're really keen to have them as single keyword ad groups. So that's what our campaign structure currently looks like. So the next thing that you need to then go and do is add those search terms as keywords as exact match only and add 2 RSAs. Now, this might be a bit controversial, but I tend to use RSAs only now because ETAs are going, and you won't be able to add any more ETAs once Google turns off the switch. So I'm trying to get my brain around using RSAs instead of ETAs, and you can effectively do something kind of similar with RSAs that you traditionally would have done with ETAs in terms of ad testing if you've got multiple RSAs. So I tend to add 2, maybe 3 RSAs, and we've actually got a whole section on how to build and ad test RSAs in the next workshop. That's why I use RSAs. So, that's a personal choice. So you can do whatever you want there. So for me, my campaign's starting to take shape now. So I've got my ad group here, Elephant Rides Near Me and Elephant Rides Thailand. I've got my single keyword in there, which is an exact match keyword, and I've got my 2 RSAs. So the next thing I need to do is I need to start pushing traffic to these ad groups. And the way that I do that is I add an exact match negative to the old campaign where the search terms originally were scraped from. So that's what I've got going on over here. So I've just got, this is my existing the new campaign that I'm building, and the old campaign where I scraped the search terms from. That's where I'm adding these exact match negatives into that campaign at the campaign level. Because of intent matching, if I added at the ad group level that triggered these search terms in the first place, there's every chance Google will just match that search term to a different ad group in the same campaign. So that's why I want to add these negatives at the campaign level. And that'll just push these search terms out of that campaign. And then we've got this structure sitting over here that's ready to accept them. So just traffic sculpting. Now, if you did happen to have exact match variants of these keywords sitting in the old campaign, now's the time to go and pause those. So again, we're just pausing any live keywords that sit in the old campaigns that were exactly the same as these new keywords that we've just created. Next thing for my SCAG campaign is I need to set the budget, and I've got this thing that I call the rule of 3. So what the rule of 3 is, back in my SCAG campaign, is I need to work out where my initial budget should be set. And the way that I do that is I look at the highest expected daily spend for each one of these search terms, and I multiply that by 3. So if I was to look at a live example of that, I've gone through, and my elephant ride keywords, I picked a date period, like 30 days, and then I've gone into the search term report and I've said search term equals Elephant Rides Thailand, for example. And then I've charted cost. You can't see it under here because of the little pop-up, but this is cost that I'm charting here. And then I just find the highest point, put my mouse over it, and it pops up with this little pop-up to tell me I spent $268 on this day for this search term. And I do the same thing for the other search term that I've added as a keyword. And so I find effectively what's the most money I've spent in total for these 2 search terms that are now going to be brand new keywords over there. What's the worst case scenario in terms of possible spend according to the previous data? And so I then I add those together, which gives me $516, multiply that by 3 to give me plenty of headroom to start with. And that gives me my budget that I would set for these for this campaign. This is my SCAG campaign. All right, so now that I've got my budget in my brain, then I need to go and work out, well, where am I going to set bids and what bid strategy am I going to use? Now, I've personally tried many bid strategies on these exact kinds of ad groups, and I inevitably end up back at manual bidding because I find that the only search terms that I add as SCAGs are generally ones that just perform so ridiculously well on their own that we don't need any kind of smart bidding to strip out different searches and that sort of thing. Like they just do so well that the goal for these ones often is I just need the ad shown all the time, as much as I can get out there, because the ROAS is so good or the CPA is so good on these search terms that I just need to almost guarantee that these things are going to be shown in the marketplace whenever someone's searching for them. So that's why I often end up at manual. Now, that said, there may be cases where maybe they're not actually performing quite as well as you need. So you do need to drop bids back a little bit or control it in other ways. So you may need to revert back to a different bid strategy. But for me, I always start out with really high budgets and really high manual bids. And I've got a little cautionary note there. Definitely stay away from impression share bidding. I've tried it on numerous accounts. I've seen plenty of clients try it. We rarely find impression share bidding actually does a good job. It will do a good job at getting impressions, but what it tends to do, if you look at the CPC graph, the CPCs tend to go through the roof. So if you want to actually control your CPCs in any way, don't use impression share bidding, because then if your CPCs go up, then your returns go down. So anyway, so we've got a rule of three again. I do love a rule of three for setting bids. And how do we do that? We look at 3 times the highest CPC that these search terms have. You've had to pay to get these search terms in your historical data. And so if we look at an example of that, similar thing, I've gone into my search term report. I've looked at search term equals elephant rides Thailand. I've put my date range here as just the last 30 days to give me an indication. And then I've just scrolled back and I found, oh, that's the highest point. This one I paid 94 cents for, average CPC on that day. And same thing for the second search term. Go through and have a look and see what your highest CPC is. Multiply them. Now, you'd have to do this multiplication independently for each search term. So for this one, I've worked out 94 cents times 3 and $1.77 times 3. So this is where I would set the initial manual bid for this search term. And this one I would set for this search term. So bids can be different, budget has to be the same. So that's why budget was adding up and bids are separate. Okay, so once you've got your budget set, your bid set, your keywords in there, everything's live, you built your ads. The next thing is, and a lot of people forget this, add observation audiences. And there are somewhere around 700 audiences that Google give us that for some reason they don't just automatically apply into campaigns. So you have to go and do this. And again, Google Ads Editor is by far the quickest way to do this. So you jump in Google Ads Editor, open up your audiences and just say add audience. And then I think you can actually tick the box to say add all audiences and go, and you'll end up with 700 odd audiences in there. Now, the reason that's important, particularly if you're using smart bidding, is that smart bidding looks at those audiences only if they're there. They look at it and they can use that data to help feed the smart bidding algorithm. If you don't have observation audiences attached to your campaign, then the smart bidding doesn't use it. They don't consider the audiences in the same way. So it's really, really important to have that in there. Even if you're using manual bidding, like I do in this particular scenario, it's very useful to be able to go in and put adjustments in based on different audiences and potentially even exclude audiences if they're not performing well for you. And unless you've got those audiences in there, you don't get the data, and it's not retrospective either. So if you add the audiences in tomorrow, you miss all of today's data. So the quicker you get them in there, the quicker you start collecting data, the quicker you can make decisions on which audiences are working for you or not. Ad extensions are the other thing that I would put in there that a lot of people forget with single keyword ad group campaigns for whatever reason. It's just good to have ad extensions in there because they give you a higher quality score on your ads and cheaper CPCs and more real estate on the page and all that sort of stuff. Now, once you've got that up and running, your SCAG is ready and it's right to turn on. Now, the next step is to be able to lock down the search terms so they truly match the keywords that are in that ad group. And there is a strategy to do that effectively circumvents Google's intent matching capabilities. And we'll go through that in part 2. All right, so the result, once we built our SCAG, it's effectively a true SCAG if we're doing that traffic sculpting. And effectively means that you can control the bids on a search term. So that's really hard to do in any other environment. So you can control bids on keywords, but you can't control bids on search terms. So thinking back, we've identified a particular search term that performs really, really well. We only want to show in this environment for that search term. So we need to be able to control bids on that search term. So having a true SCAG like this really allows you to drill right down to that search term level and effectively bid on a search term, which you just can't do in any other environment. But again, you wouldn't want to do it for every single search term because it's an administrative nightmare and you're going against the Google bidding algorithms and making it really hard for Google. And And if your competitors are doing smart bidding, they very well may outbid you. So that's it for single keyword ad groups. Happy to take any questions on that particular component at this point.
I see one from Matteo. And so he says, in your SCAG format with manual CPC, do you ever adjust max CPC based on any other metric like impression share based on the previous day data?
That is an excellent question. So yes, you do constantly adjust your bids. The formula that I gave you is a starting place. So it's a good, reasonably successful kind of place to start, but you have to watch what's going on. And if you're losing impression share in these ad groups and the returns are stellar, which hopefully they will be, then you need to increase bids. And it's not unusual, in my experience, to find you're setting bids like where you're getting maybe a $1 CPC, your bids might end up at $10 or even $15. So, and that's to make sure that you're getting all the impressions that are available. So absolutely stay on top of your CPCs and make sure that you're getting the impressions that you want out of that.
Awesome. Matthias says, hey there, not necessarily a SCAG specific question, but have you done any experimentation with locking RSA headlines and descriptions so you effectively have ETAs with limited variability?
Absolutely. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff on that in the second workshop. So I may put a pin in that one if that's okay, and we'll talk about it in the second workshop.
No problem at all. Anonymous says, do we add all observation audiences?
Yes. Every audience you can get your hands on, put it in as observation because it doesn't restrict anything. It just gives you nothing but positives. It's just data and data levels. And that includes not just the Google audiences, but it's also like remarketing audiences and anything that you've got coming in from Google Analytics. If that's an audience, put it in there as observation because once you start collecting little buckets of data, you're going to be able to start sort of fine tuning those audiences.
Awesome. Mario says, how do you differ brand related keywords versus product related keywords? Does it make sense to separate those?
Great question. And I think I answer that further in this presentation, but if I don't, can you pop up and say, hey, you didn't answer my question? So I think we do.
Cool. And then Matteo, and then I think this is the last one. Do you or can you address STAG format single theme ad groups? I'm guessing that's sort of the next section, but if you have a differentiation, feel free to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I might, if I don't answer it in the next section, Matteo, just pop your hand up and say, hey, I wasn't answered. But the next section is about single intent ad groups, which is a twist on single theme ad groups. So, and I think I might cover the differences between the two. And if I don't, make sure you bring it up for me.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks for answering the questions. I think that was great. And yeah, I think we're ready to move on to the next section then.
All right. So let's jump into SIAGs, whatever you want to call them. Single intent ad groups. Now, in this environment, you have to think about the intent of the searcher before starting to group your keywords together into an ad group. Now, this is a bit different to your single theme ad groups. So single theme ad groups might be, for example, if I've got a plumber and I've got like someone typing in cheap, they want a cheap plumber, and then another person might type in they want a discount plumber or something like that. And you've got a whole bunch of cheap keywords and a whole bunch of discount keywords. So a single theme ad group, you would typically have two separate ad groups, one for cheap, one for discount. Probably not the best example, but it gives you the idea that they can kind of be related and they can kind of actually be the same intent because the intent of both searches is to find a plumber that's well priced. So the words they're using are almost immaterial as long as they're kind of down the same path. So that's where a single intent ad group would combine both of those keyword sets into one ad group. Now, we need to remember that Google is doing intent matching in the background. That's one of their huge algorithm changes that they brought in. So we need to make sure that we are feeding that intent-driven approach, and intent-driven ad groups is the best way that I've seen to feed that particular machine. So in your brain, think about intent, and it's different to themes in that way. It's kind of a cousin, I suppose. It's one level up. Now, in single intent, ad groups, similar to single theme ad groups. It's quite common to see multiple match types. In fact, it's probably preferred. I don't have a preference. Normally, I would start with phrase match and exact match and see how much traffic I get. But I'm not afraid to go to broad match if I need to. But I do it carefully if I'm moving into broad match. And I guess this is probably moving into the next session, but it's appropriate here. So I typically would only pick up my best keywords and turn those into broad keywords to start with. So sort of ease into it and make sure that you're not going to blow up your budget and you're not blowing up your search terms. Because broad match keywords can be crazy, but they can actually work really, really well. And make sure that when you're building your ads for this single intent ad group, that the ads speak to the intent of the searcher. So it's not the theme of the keywords that are in the ad group, it's the intent of the searcher. And it's quite possible that your ads won't include the keywords, or they'll be kind of close, but it's all about intent. So very important word. Here's an example of a single intent ad group within a campaign, sorry. So we've got our local plumber. So we've got local plumbers, affordable plumbers, certified, and emergency. So these are, if you are a searcher looking for one of these sort of categories, you're looking for something quite specific. The words you use to convey that to Google will be search terms that might be like this, for example. So, I'm looking for plumbers in my area. Well, that's someone genuinely looking for a local plumber, or plumbers near me, all those sorts of things. So these are all bunched into one ad group, and that ad group would serve ads that doesn't necessarily contain these keywords in it, and that's okay, because the Google intent matching algorithm is, you're basically feeding it this bunch of data to say, these keywords, when people that search and they've got this kind of intent, show them this ad that feeds that intent. So it's not directly tied like kind of older structures or traditional structures. So yeah, that's how we build a single intent ad group. So hopefully that's useful there. Question is then, when do we use these bad boys? All right, well, if we like using smart bidding and broad or phrase match types, then this is a very, very good structure to use to feed Google. You also use it for brand campaigns. Now, brand campaigns, you could argue that they're single theme ad groups or single intent, like it's kind of similar for brand purposes. So I would typically put all my brand keywords into one campaign and often in one ad group, because we're trying to, again, consolidate that data so that we can feed it into Google. And I've got a whole section in a minute on how I would build brand campaigns and how to bid them and that sort of stuff. And the other thing is that often on brand campaigns, you need control over the wording in the ads because you want your brand term in the ad. So I rarely, if ever, use DSA ads in a brand campaign, because DSA ads, obviously you've got no control over the headlines. So you can't actually control the fact that you want your brand term injected against keywords that contain your brand. Now, we use single intent ad groups in combination with SKAGs and with HAGAKURE. See, I pronounced that really well that time, right? So we combine these three together if the circumstances are right. So as Jeff said, we're not saying this is a one-size-fits-all scenario. We want to give you three distinct tools to put in your tool bag, and then you can pull them out and use them as you see fit and as suits the client situation. And this might just be something that you add into something else cool and funky that you do, but it's good to have these extra tools in your toolkit. So we'll talk about HAGAKURE in a second. But let's crack on with SIAGs. So in terms of splitting your campaigns out, again, we want to try and consolidate as much data as possible. So think about only splitting campaigns where you have different requirements for different campaigns. And that's often things like budgets. Budgets have to be different. So maybe I've got a budget for the UK and a budget for the US, for example, underneath a sort of a total account level budget. So I will definitely need different campaigns in that scenario because of the budget. Or it might be different KPIs. So maybe you're selling TVs and washing machines. So TVs are going to sell at a different rate and have different ROI than washing machines. So I would potentially need different campaigns for those. And similarly for targeting. So that's geographic targeting or device targeting or whatever else it is that you're sort of splitting up. So try to think when you're splitting out your campaigns and you're mapping out what your campaign structure is going to look like, try not to break stuff up unless you really, really need to. The next step then is to build your ad groups by grouping those keywords into searches intent. And I haven't yet found an easy way to do this other than look at your keyword list and sort of just give some thought to that. So this actually, for me, is the most time-consuming part of building a SIAG is how do I group my keywords by intent? You then go and add your 2 RSAs or ETAs or whatever else you want to do. Add your observation audiences and your extensions. This will be a common theme that you'll see in pretty much everything that I present because it's nearly always missed, particularly the observation audiences, and it's just so critical. All right, that's it for SIAGs. Happy to take any questions. Matteo, did I answer your question?
Yeah, Matteo says, yes, you did answer his question, which is great. I don't see any questions that have come through, but I think last time, once we prompted for questions, a bunch of people had questions. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask about? Tim says, for local SIAGs, should zip codes be in different SIAGs?
That's a great question. Well, think about the intent. I suppose it depends on what you're selling. Like if you're selling something that is postcode specific, then yes, you would potentially put them in different SIAGs. But again, go through that thought process. Do I really need to split this up, or can I put it together? And if I can put it together and let Google kind of work it out, then do that. But if it really does need to be split, then do it.
Yeah, he's saying basically service contractors in different service areas, would they consider that? I have some experience with this, and I think that zip codes are pretty granular, and so I think you'd have to see how they perform. I mean, it's a method, right? It's a method to try and have a grouping, but yeah. I mean, especially if they perform differently, but I also think, would you geotag it that way as well? That's yeah. So I'm not sure if I know the answer to it either. Yeah,
look, it is a tough question. I would probably err on putting them into a local contractor's SIAG and have keywords that are, plumber near me and that sort of stuff, but also then have plumber plus the zip code and maybe the actual name of the zip code. So yeah, that's probably what I would do there. Is I would try to group them into someone's looking for someone local, so have an ad group that is the local ad group. Unless you've got maybe different landing pages or something like that you're trying to send, from one zip code goes off to one landing page and another one goes to a different one, then you would definitely need different ad groups.
Yeah, I think that it also, some of it's based on your performance, right? Like, is your historical performance better when you break it up by zip codes? Like I know some people are successful that way. Sometimes it's just harder to manage because, like where I am, I mean, there's probably hundreds of zip codes, versus more other granular things like a city perhaps or something like that. So if that's your current strategy, then I would definitely consider it. But also, I'm just not sure how many people are searching for that versus other intent.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about intent, right? And in my experience, the zip code searches generally a lower volume than the more generic-y sort of ones. So putting them all into one ad group that is this is my local ad group kind of deal with all of my zip codes in it could actually feed the algorithm a nice big chunk of data that's very intent driven.
Yeah, and that sort of goes with your thoughts on, if it's 2% of your volume and a certain number of impressions, then it is worthy. But if it isn't, and I know that's more for the SKAGs, but you just got to, for anything, I would try to figure out how much weight does it carry. Is this like your entire, like, is it carrying a lot of weight right now for you? Are the numbers too hard to ignore? Then yeah, you should absolutely break it out. But if you were to ask me what my definition of a local targeting is, that wouldn't be the first thing, or that hasn't been as, I agree that it seems really targeted, but the volume is pretty low. Most people don't, from my experience, don't do zip code searches. They do near me, or they do the city, or they sort of let Google fill in the blanks a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So
Mateo says, can you speak to an example that you've recently set up and had success with SIAG? I think a real world example would help seed the concept.
So can we talk about a live example? So I thought about it, and an example that comes to mind is one that we recently did for a charity, where the charity was looking for donations of cash, and they were also looking for donations of furniture and household items. And so the existing structure was a single theme ad group structure where we had the cash ad group. So we're looking for donations of money and all that stuff. But then we had theme-based ad groups based around the types of household goods that someone could donate. So there was, kitchen appliances and bedroom stuff and lounge room stuff and that sort of thing. So it was split into themes based on the types of stuff someone might be looking to donate, and typing into Google, where can I donate a couch to? That sort of thing. So we consolidated that and put the household stuff into a household ad group, which was a single intent ad group, because someone's looking to donate a piece of something from their house as opposed to some cash. So if we look at those two ad groups, someone looking to donate cash has no idea or no intent to donate a couch, but someone who's looking for a couch probably doesn't want to donate cash. They just want to get rid of their couch. So it's a totally different intent, and that's why they could be separated. They could basically be comfortably together in two separate ad groups, as opposed to a whole bunch of ad groups based around the types of donations that people were looking to make.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your questions and for your time today. I just wanted to just say again, thank you, Sean, for your time. Mario says amazing session. I learned a lot today. Thanks.
That's
so we have a pretty small and mighty group on this session, and everybody's really enjoying it. So very engaged group. Actually, every single person who jumped on has pretty much stayed until the end, and that's always a good sign.
Thank you, everyone.
So
appreciate it.
Robert said, great session, so awesome. Pam said, thank you. It was so valuable. Tim says, great stuff. Thanks for everything. Again, some people have already sent me the testimonials, which is great. That was Sean's idea. I've never done that mid-session before, but I think it's a good idea to have everybody say when they like something while they like it, versus like telling you like 2 months from now to give me a testimonial. So that's really helpful for us.
Amazing. Yeah, look, thanks again. I know we've said it a million times, but look, thank you everyone for coming along and being such a great participatory audience, and Jeff for the opportunity to share some knowledge. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, this is great. So that's the end of day one, and we'll see you next week.